Video contains sensitive courtroom testimony. Viewer discretion is advised. This content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. From a world-famous, beloved Karate Kid actor to being trapped in one of the most powerful snarls of an abuser, his career and life definitely took a turn, spiraling before our very eyes, while the world watched, doing nothing. Smith has always lived in full view of the world, yet somehow, the most important parts of his life seem to have unfolded in silence. He grew up surrounded by fame, raised by two of Hollywood's most recognizable names, and mentored by powerful figures who were treated more like family than outsiders. Among those names was Diddy Combs, a man whose influence stretched across music, fashion, business, and, as we're learning now, far more troubling territory. Over the years has been seen at industry events, photographed at private parties, and praised as the future of culture. But in those same years, he began to disappear. Not from headlines necessarily, but from himself. His once bold interviews grew vague. His public appearances became fewer. And when he did speak, his words started to sound like riddles, guarded, layered, cryptic. At first, most people thought he was just eccentric, maybe even theatrical. But as more disturbing allegations surrounding Diddy come to light, his detachment is beginning to feel like something else entirely. There was a tweet once, just 5 words, "The truth is coming soon." No follow-up, no clarification, and no one pressed for one. Why would they? Has always been cryptic, but looking back, that sentence lingers differently now. It came at a time when Diddy's empire was still untouchable, when his name was still said with reverence, not caution. It came long before the lawsuits, the leaked footage, and the confessions began surfacing from those who were once afraid to speak. And somewhere in this unraveling story, another name quietly keeps returning, Usher. Like he was young when he entered Diddy's world. Young when he was sent to live in Diddy's home as part of a mentorship program that, at the time, seemed like a golden opportunity. Young enough for people to now ask if what looked like guidance was actually something much darker. But that's what makes this moment so complicated, because what he has done for years now is withdraw quietly, consistently, and that withdrawal is starting to feel less like personal choice and more like self-preservation. Fans have started revisiting old interviews, rewatching stage moments, and reading back through things he said that no one paid close attention to at the time. The way he looked away when his father touched on certain topics. The way he smiled without smiling. The moments when his voice dropped, when he stumbled over a name, when he paused a little too long before answering. We don't yet know the full extent of what went through, but what's becoming harder to deny is that something did happen. Something that shaped how he moved through the world, how he spoke, and more importantly, what he chose not to say. And now, with Diddy facing an avalanche of public scrutiny, and Usher's early years with him coming under fresh examination, the silence surrounding no longer feels like mystery. It feels like survival. In Hollywood, the word mentorship carries a kind of sacred weight. It's the promise of guidance, protection, and the passing down of wisdom from one generation to the next. For young artists like Smith, it was supposed to mean learning from legends. It was supposed to mean safety. But when you peel back the polished layers of that promise, it starts to look more like a doorway, one that doesn't always lead where it should. Didn't just stumble into elite circles, he was brought there. And one of the most consistent figures around him during that time was Diddy Combs. Diddy wasn't just another celebrity, he was family adjacent, a powerful friend of Will Smith, and someone who had helped shape the careers of countless artists. On the surface, that kind of connection seemed like a blessing. But not every opportunity is what it appears to be. This wasn't the first time Diddy had been close to someone so young. Years earlier, Usher, then just a teenager, was sent to live with Diddy in New York under the label of mentorship. The story was repeated like a badge of honor, proof of Diddy's generosity and influence. But in recent years, the tone around that story has changed. People have started asking questions they were too afraid or too distracted to ask back then. And now, the same questions are circling around. But if you compare the timelines, if you step back and study the pattern, something starts to feel familiar. Different year, different kid, same mentor, same silence, same discomfort surfacing years later. Some now look to Will Smith, not as the cause, but as someone who may have unknowingly opened the door. In this industry, introductions are everything. Who brings you in often says more than who's already in the room. And if Will truly believed Diddy was safe, if he genuinely saw him as someone worthy of his son's trust, then that belief may have cost more than anyone expected. This is where it gets harder to untangle, because we're not just talking about bad decisions or poor judgment. We're talking about a system that's been running for decades, one that knows how to hide behind success, charm, and legacy. A system that paints itself as mentorship but works in shadows. And if both usher and were brought in the same way, if both were praised, protected, and positioned, then maybe the real question isn't whether something happened. Maybe it's how often it's happened, and how many just never made it out. To understand how deep this goes, you have to listen to the people who were close enough to see it for what it was, but far enough to survive it. Deal was one of them. As Diddy's former bodyguard, he spent years watching the power dynamics behind the fame, and what he described wasn't just a high-profile lifestyle, it was a system. Gina said on record that many of the people in Diddy's inner circle lived in fear of being blacklisted, fear of being exposed, fear of losing everything if they ever said the wrong thing. He described a culture where silence was expected, loyalty was demanded, and stepping out of line came with real consequences. The parties, the trips, the access, it all looked glamorous, but behind the scenes it was about control. People weren't just part of the machine, they were owned by it. That's the world Smith was brought into, the world Usher knew as a teenager. A world that wasn't built for safety, it was built for silence. And the most chilling part? No one had to say it out loud. The rules were never written, but everyone knew them. It was like they were asked to stay close, stay quiet, and not ask questions, especially the young ones, especially the ones who were still figuring out who they were. Some might ask, why didn't they just leave? Why didn't say something? But that's the wrong question. Because once you're in that kind of system, once someone with that much power puts you in their orbit, it becomes nearly impossible to see your way out, especially when the world keeps applauding from the outside. Didn't have bars around him. Neither did Usher. What they had was an emotional cage, one built from trust, fear, manipulation, and image. When people look back now at the interviews, the stage appearances, the quiet moments, they see boys who looked free but didn't feel it. Eyes would drift. His answers would trail off. Usher, too, would tense up when certain topics came up. These weren't just personality quirks, they were symptoms, signs that something wasn't right. And yet Diddy's empire kept growing. His connections, his wealth, his reputation, all of it untouched. Because the silence around him wasn't just personal, it was systemic. Even now, with lawsuits and allegations piling up, it's hard for many of his former associates to say anything clearly. Some still speak in code, others refuse to speak at all. And that tells you everything you need to know. Because in Diddy's world, survival didn't come from speaking out. It came from staying close and staying quiet. Before Smith, there was Usher. Before the whispers, the lawsuits, and the social media scrutiny, there was a teenage boy sent to live with a man named Diddy Combs. It was framed as an opportunity, a mentorship, the kind of life-changing access most aspiring artists could only dream of. Usher was just 13 when he entered Diddy's world. He didn't just visit, he lived in his house, ate with him, trained under him, partied around him. At the time, nobody asked what it meant for a child to be raised by the culture of a grown man known for adult indulgence, elite circles, and late-night industry events. It was brushed off as hustle, as preparation for greatness. But years later in interviews, Usher would speak carefully, choosing his words, laughing through discomfort, and avoiding anything too specific. One interview in particular resurfaced online, where he admitted he saw things in Diddy's house that he shouldn't have seen at that age. He laughed when he said it, but the laugh didn't match his eyes. It wasn't a confession, it was a residue, a glimpse into how early exposure doesn't just shape careers, it shapes trauma. And now, that story feels uncomfortably close to. He was young too, well-connected, already famous but still forming. And like Usher, he didn't just meet Diddy in passing, he was invited in. And just like before, no one asked too many questions. The world celebrated it, called it culture, called it black excellence. But what no one ever really asked was, what does that access cost? How many times does the setup have to look the same before we stop calling it coincidence? It's not just about two young men anymore. It's about the structure that brought them both in, the older men who stood beside them, and the unspoken rules that followed. For Usher, that period in Diddy's world came and went, but the discomfort around it has never truly disappeared. For it feels like we're watching that same discomfort unfold in real time. Both were introduced through trust. Both were praised for being fearless, creative, and groundbreaking. But maybe those traits weren't nurtured. Maybe they were used. And the emotional toll, that disconnection, the need to retreat, the reluctance to speak, might be the only real evidence we'll ever get. When we look at their journeys side by side, it doesn't feel like a coincidence. It feels like a pattern, and patterns once seen are hard to unsee. As moved through his teens and early 20s, he became harder for the public to define. He didn't present himself the way most celebrity offspring do, and he didn't seem interested in playing along with Hollywood's rules. Instead, he leaned into his own rhythm, experimenting with fashion, philosophy, and language in ways that challenged familiar boxes. But rather than embrace his individuality, many observers dismissed him. Too eccentric, trying too hard, just weird, these were the labels attached to him. The depth behind his actions was often ignored in favor of surface-level headlines. But through it all, kept speaking, just not in the way people expected. His music became his clearest form of communication. In songs like ERYS, 90, and Riot, there are recurring themes: longing, emotional confusion, alienation, and a hunger for meaning. The lyrics don't offer clear answers, but they open windows into someone working through internal conflict. They reveal not just a performer, but a person still trying to make sense of the space he grew up in. Life in a Year may be the most quietly devastating of them all. There's no headline-grabbing moment, just a soft unraveling of vulnerability. Sings, whether the song is about a relationship, the industry, or something more abstract, the emotion behind it is undeniable. There's rejection there, disillusionment, a quiet ache, and for many listeners, it feels like the most unfiltered version of him we've ever seen. He didn't need to spell everything out. Maybe he couldn't, but through melody and metaphor, he gave people a different way to understand him, one that wasn't about scandal or shock, but survival. For those who listened closely, the pain was always in the pause. The story was always in the sound. In that same Red Table Talk episode, also discussed the role of psychedelics in his personal growth. He described how they helped him understand himself in new ways. His mother, Smith, supported his perspective and shared that their family embraced plant medicine as part of their wellness journey. It was an unusual level of openness for a Hollywood family, but it offered a rare glimpse into the internal challenges was working through. He never called it trauma, he never framed it as survival, but there was an undeniable shift. The kid who once wore his heart on stage began wearing armor instead, and whether intentional or not, his distance started to look more like a decision than a phase. Fans connected the dots. They watched his interviews, studied his music, and revisited moments that felt different in hindsight. Many believe that through all of it has been telling his story in his own way. And while his words may not come in the form of accusations or press releases, they continue to land with quiet weight, especially now as names, connections, and memories resurface. Because sometimes revealing something doesn't mean shouting it. Sometimes it just means letting it be heard by those ready to listen. When you lay it all out side by side, Smith's cryptic messages, Usher's teenage years under Diddy's wing, Will Smith's proximity to powerful circles, and the long list of resurfaced interviews and moments, it's hard not to see a pattern. Not one defined by a single event, but by repetition, silence, discomfort, and a system that rewards closeness to power while punishing those who speak out. This story isn't just about one person or one experience. It's about a culture that normalizes blurred boundaries and calls it mentorship. It's about how young artists, especially young black men, are often placed in rooms where influence is mistaken for care, where visibility replaces safety, and where the most important truths are hidden not by lies, but by absence. And Usher and even Justin didn't tell the same story, but their paths mirror each other in ways that are too familiar to ignore. Both were introduced to Diddy during vulnerable stages of their lives. Both were praised for their boldness. Both, over time, became more withdrawn, more complex, and more difficult to read, not because they failed, but because something around them changed. And the more we revisit those timelines, the footage, the expressions, the subtle shifts, the clearer it becomes that something was being communicated. Maybe not in words, but in behavior, in the distance, in silence. What's surfacing now, through lawsuits and leaked testimony, doesn't just expose individuals. It exposes a structure. A long-standing pattern in the entertainment world where access is currency, image is armor, and young voices are often the last to be heard, even when they're the ones carrying the heaviest truths. It's not our job to assume, but it is our responsibility to recognize the signs. To look again at what we were told was normal. To question why so many young artists retreat, go quiet, or break down when the spotlight fades. Because when multiple stories echo each other, when discomfort spans generations, It's no longer a coincidence. It's culture, and culture can be challenged. Smith didn't give the world a tell-all, but he gave the world something. He gave his moments, statements, and even his silence. And now, it's up to all of us to decide what we do with that. What stood out to you most about's journey? And do you believe the entertainment industry truly protects young talent or just profits off them? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, but please keep the conversation respectful. Thank you.